The global markets took a hit last week with Trump's reciprocal and universal tariffs coming into effect. Before we discuss how India is responding to this, we're going to ask a more fundamental question. Is there anything reciprocal about these tariffs at all? Or is this another bit of misleading marketing from Trump? I'm Rohan Paranjpe and this is The Overcorrection. Stay tuned. So today we are talking about Trump's tariffs. Now, we've been anticipating these tariffs for months, right? We've been hearing reciprocal tariffs. And I think hearing that so much, we all assumed they would be just that.
In trade, reciprocal tariffs usually means matching another country's import duties. If country A charges a 20% tariff on a product from country B, then country B charges the same 20% tariff on that product coming from country A.
Reciprocal in nature. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Now, Trump's team has made it clear that these tariffs they've calculated are not based just on an absolute measure of tariffs placed by other countries on the US. They also account for things such as unfair trade practices, currency manipulation, and in Trump's own words, other forms of cheating. Now, yes, while this may give them some leeway in how they calculate these tariffs, even a brief inspection of the formula that they've released shows you that this is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. So, if you were expecting a weighted average of all the tariffs placed by a country on the US, combined with some complicated accounting of currency manipulation, as well as an approximation of how unfair trade practices play into all of this, well, that is not what you're going to get. This is the formula that has been released by the United States government for how they calculated these tariffs. Now, what at first glance appears to be a very mathy formula, it's got all the fancy Greek letters that tell you that whoever wrote this formula is really smart. Okay? Remember that. That's what those letters mean. If you ever see those letters, they mean that whoever wrote this is really smart. However, on further inspection, this formula simply boils down to a very simple fraction, one that represents simply a country's trade deficit with the US in the numerator divided by the total imports from that country to the US in the denominator. Now we're going to play a quick little video here which does a great job of just showing you how this math all cancels out to reveal this formula.
The effective tariff rate, that's this series of symbols and letters on the left, that's what they're trying to figure out for each country, right? And to get there, they take into account how sensitive customers are to higher prices and how likely prices are to increase, which they set at 4 and 0.25, respectively. But multiply them, and they effectively cancel each other out to equal simply 1. And we know that multiplying anything by 1 does nothing. So clean that up and you're left with something a lot more straightforward, where X is defined as total goods exports, M is total goods imports. Subtract one from the other. That's what a trade imbalance in goods is.
If the United States has a large trade deficit with a country, meaning that they buy more from that country than they sell to that country, the numerator becomes larger, as does this whole fraction. As does the tariff. The tariff is basically this number divided by 2. Trump is imposing tariffs on countries that export more to the US than they import from the US. This doesn't have to do anything with reciprocity of tariffs and certainly nothing to do with currency manipulation and unfair trade practices. Now, there is some logic people are saying Trump has to this. Essentially, he does not want to be in a trade deficit with other countries. Whether it is a bad idea for the United States to be in a trade deficit with other countries and how many countries should they be in a trade deficit with, how much should this trade deficit be, is something that economists are currently still debating on. I mean, a good example given in this very video later explains that, you yourself in your life are in a trade deficit with many people. At your job, your company is in a trade deficit with you. They give you money and you give them services, and not the other way around. At the supermarket, it's the other way around. You give the supermarket money and they give you services. You're in a trade deficit with them. Does this apply to countries? Well, probably not so simplistically, but perhaps not so simplistically the other way around as well. Another important point to note is that Trump has levied tariffs on countries with which the US is in a trade surplus with. Right, so this formula comes with a big caveat. It's got a floor of 10% to be the final output. Why? Well, because he said so and he wants it that way. Which actually brings me to an interesting point, like how is the world responding to this? Well, I really like Fareed Zakaria's take on this whole issue, and we're going to put a link to the video down below, but he said some interesting things, essentially about how Trump's entire narrative about why they are doing this, where he thinks America has been disenfranchised by the world and taken advantage of over the last few decades, is a false narrative. And in fact, what allows Trump to almost bully people around is the major commercial and financial heft that the United States carries as a nation. I think this 10% floor that doesn't even follow the formula they themselves have put out is one clear indication of that. He's doing what he wants when he wants to. Let's watch a bit of Fareed Zakaria right now.
His view of the United States is of a victimized colony.
Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years.
Painting a picture of a hollowed out country with empty factories, unemployed workers, and stagnant wages. The reality is the opposite, and it is only because it is the opposite. In other words, because of America's unrivaled economic power, that Trump can even attempt his tariff policy.
Now, all this being said, we can criticize the Trump's administration for its, say, lack of transparency and clarity around these tariffs. But what we perhaps cannot criticize the Trump administration for is their negotiation power. As much fun of him as people are making, over 50 countries apparently have reached out to the Trump administration to try to strike deals. At the end, people are saying he's a businessman and he's running this country like a business, and he doesn't care for short-term harm, and he's banking on it paying out in the long term. Will this be true? Is this all a bluff to get people to the table? Well, I guess the next few weeks will tell us. Now, this 50 number has come from the Trump administration as well, and no list of 50 countries has been released, but you can bet that there are a few people calling. Look at India's own Foreign Minister Jaishankar commenting on how he plans to deal with the ongoing and changing situation in global politics.
We decided that we will engage the Trump administration early on this set of issues. And we were very open with them, very constructive with them, as they were with us. And what we agreed to do was to try to negotiate a bilateral trade agreement by fall of this year. To the best of my knowledge, and I could be corrected here, I think we are the only country after President Trump has assumed presidency the second time, which has actually reached such an understanding in principle.
Focusing on the idea that, hey, the United States has been at the forefront of dictating how global economies work over the last many decades. If they are choosing to create a stand and make a change in how they are going to play a part as actors in the global stage, then we're all going to have to take a note of it, and we're all going to have to respectfully respond. And we see that India today finds itself uniquely positioned with all these tariffs being placed. Yes, there are tariffs on India, but we still stand a large comparative advantage to our neighbors. Countries like China have responded with retaliatory tariffs. India has not. We are still looking for a more diplomatic solution. Talks have been going on between India and the United States since February, and hopefully some type of trade deal will be reached soon. So I think in the midst of all of this, we can see that Indian foreign diplomacy, again, continues to be at an all-time high. We continue to try to strike that balance, and I think that is something that within this country, bipartisanly, Indians are in favor of this government about. I think that's a slightly positive note on which we can end this story. Let us know what you think in the comments. What do you think is going to happen? And what do you think of Trump's plan? Do you think he has one? Like, do you think it will actually play out in the long term in their favor? And do you think India is doing the right thing by not imposing retaliatory tariffs on the United States? We'd love to know your thoughts. If you like this video and you want to see more such content, please head over to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify. We've got a lot more stuff coming up for you. Stay tuned.